Welcome, governors. Hey, this is Adashi here, and this is part 3 in my series on troop type. And in this video, we're going to talk about infantry. And I'm going to warn you from the start, we're going to get way down the rabbit hole from this one, and you're going to find out just how nerdy I am. But if that's something that you kind of really enjoy, then I think you're going to really like this video, so hang in there. So when I first look at a troop type, what I really want to see is what did Lilith intend? Like, what was Lilith's intent or vision for what this troop type is going to do, what these commanders are going to do? So, to start with kind of finding that out, I look at talents. And specifically, I look at the infantry talents because this is what Lilith said, hey, what do I want to make unique? What do I want to give the infantry? And I found 4 kind of talents in here that I think are noteworthy and unique. The first one is elite soldiers. It gives you lots of stats. The next one is strong of body. It gives you lots of stats. Third one is hold the line, which gives you some anti-swarm. And the next one is snare of thorns, which gives you some stickiness. So if we were to kind of think about this, and the first two I'll group together, elite soldiers and strong of body, you just get lots of stats. And if you have more stats than your opponent, it effectively makes you the biggest and strongest kid on the playground, right? You don't need to be fancy. You just need to go up and just pound them and be the last one standing. And I think that's what they intended infantry to do, is just straight stat check people. And that's kind of a cool way to play a champion. You don't have to be fancy. You just have to win. And that's what infantry were intended to do from the beginning, I think. Now let's look at the other two real quick. Hold the line. This makes it so when more people attack you, you have a chance to proc this and get damage reduction. So it kind of fits that mold of what I would call anti-swarm. The more targets are on you, the tankier you kind of get, which is a great way to play an infantry commander, right? It gives you that ability to be in the front line, take on multiple opponents, kind of hang in there, kind of wait for the cavalry to arrive. No pun intended there. And I think that's another nice feature of infantry commanders. The next one is snare of thorns. This is a little strange to me. It gives you some stickiness, which is kind of cool, right? If a unit comes up and tries to do these hit and run tactics, like you might expect something like a cavalry to do, it gives you that stickiness. It gives you some peel, so you can kind of give room to your other kind of high DPS allies. So, okay, I'll buy this. It gives you a chance to slow targets. All right, cool, cool. So, looking at these talents, I see really 3 things going for infantry. And let's keep a running total here, because we're going to look at this through the evolution of the commanders. So, what I have right now is lots of stats, slows for that stickiness, and anti swarm technology. All right. Well, the first infantry commander that was released into the game was Charles Martel as a gold key commander. And also, he just happens to be a really fantastic commander even today. So let's look at his first ability, and you get a big shield. Okay, so this introduces a new concept to infantry, and that's a concept of sustain. And I would classify sustain in 2 ways, either proactively or reactively. And this is a proactive sustain, right? A shield to absorb damage coming in. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to note about this is the damage bonus for 4 seconds. So what this theoretically would do is if you had a primary Richard, or I'm sorry, a primary Charles, then the secondary commander, when they use their active ability, is going to get a really sizable damage boost. Okay, so let's add those in. So now you have really 5 concepts. You've got stats, you've got the slows, the anti-swarm, the sustain, and the combos. And we'll see if this kind of becomes a narrative with other infantry commanders. The second skill, lots of stats. All right, check. That's kind of what we expected. And his final skill, counterattack damage. All right, so more anti-swarm technology. Kind of exactly what we expected. Now, what we didn't find is some kind of stickiness. But let's keep going. Let's look at the next commander, and that's going to be Richard. So Richard's primary skill, a healing factor. As we said, that's kind of that reactive sustain. So you take damage and then you heal it back up. Okay. Very common throughout several different games. That's just how it works. And that's kind of what we expected to see. In addition to that, now we see this march speed reduction. All right, so now we've got that more stickiness kind of baked into the kit in this commander. Keep going, more counterattack damage, more damage reduction, exactly what we expected to see. Oop, there's our stats, 30% stats, very nice. And our expertise ability gives us more stickiness, a 50% slow for 5 seconds. So right now, we've got kind of all the 5 things we'd expect to see that we've kind of gone over. All right, cool. Now, Richard doesn't set up any type of combo, so you're not going to have that same combo that you're going to see with the Charles Martel. So let's see if that continues to be a theme or not. Well, kind of as an interesting note to what was going on in the game at this time is what a lot of people started doing is they started looking and going, hey, what if I just run either mixed troops or I run just infantry and then I put behind them kind of a high value target? And why they started doing this is when you're in the open field fighting, other targets like Minas or your YSGs that started doing big damage, people would just kill them first. Or if you had something like a Joan that would buff, you just kill them first, right? And it started becoming like a priority target list or hit list where these big damage dealers would get burned out fast and they really couldn't do anything in the field. And it also made these lower priority targets like your Charles and your Richards pretty effective because they'd be out there for a long time with all the sustain. So what people started doing is taking these secondary targets such as your Jones, your YSGs, and sticking them behind your infantry commanders. And this worked out really well because you really didn't lose anything. And YSG is really kind of the quintessential, and it's still to this day, commander for that reason, is when you look at YSG, he doesn't really care about archers that much. It's really just this second skill that, don't get me wrong, 100% attack is really, really good. But outside of that, he's still really solid. So you take something like a Charles and pair him up with a YSG, and now you have a really effective open field, big AoE commander. And that was really kind of the dominant way that open field fighting really started off in specifically KVK 1. Well, this kind of opened up a new concept into the game where infantry commanders started becoming really flexible, right? You could pair infantry commanders with basically anything, and commanders that usually kind of struggled in the open field were surprisingly effective. So let's add on to the list here. Lilith actually didn't intend it, it was player driven, that you actually started having flexibility in commander pairings, which was actually just a fantastic concept. And whoever started doing that, kudos to them. Well, let's look at the next infantry commanders that came into the game. And they're going to be Alex and Constantine. And let's look at Constantine first, because pretty typical infantry commander. He does exactly what you'd kind of expect an infantry garrison commander to do. He has damage reduction, attack reduction. He also has a 40% infantry health bonus, 40% of stats, and a Season 2 commander is a lot of stats, and health is just a great stat to have. Come over here, you see the sustain come in. This is a massive heal. And to top things off, more stats. All right, so what did we expect from him? That you'd have stats? Check. Now, you don't see any slows, you don't see any anti-swarm, but you do have the sustain, and you do have the flexibility because you can still take champions, especially those buffing champions like the Jones of the world, a Constantine Joan in the open field. No one's going to target your Constantine, and you can really add to that buffing. And of course, you also have this AoE buff that you do just from Constantine. Really great flexibility in this champion. Alex is really where we started to see a shift in the infantry. And that shift actually continues on, but let's talk about this a little bit. Because Alex isn't a defensive champion at all. He actually does a lot of damage. Now, he does have the sustain from the shield. That concept is still carried over into Alex, and he has this debuff. So he actually runs that same combo that you'd see from like an Alex, or I'm sorry, a Charles. He just does it reverse. Charles buffs your own damage, and Alex debuffs the targets around you so they take more damage. But same concept. His next ability, though, and this is where it starts to change because it's just a straight nuke, and it's a big one 1700 skill damage. That's a lot of damage coming at you with a chance to proc it. And Alex really started pumping out some big numbers and dealing some big damage. Now, he doubled down on that with more mark speed, which is fantastic, lots of attack, and to finish it off, lots of attack. So, what do we see in Alex right now? We see stats, check. He's got stats in spades. Now, we don't see any slows, we don't see any anti swarm, we do have the sustain, we do have the combos, and once again, we have a lot of flexibility because Alex is one of those champions again. You don't really want to target down, although he's getting to the point where he's doing enough damage that he's moving up that priority list. But you can still stick a champion like YSG behind him, and Alex YSG is going to do a ton of damage in the open field, not only from Alex's nuke, but you also have that YSG nuke who's being buffed by your debuff of your active skill. Great combination to really push out some damage. Now, we go down and let's look at the next commanders. I'm not going to talk about Leo too much, but let's talk about Guan. So, what did Guan do? Well, Guan is really a revolutionary champion for infantry because he said, screw all that in the beginning. What does Guan do? Lots of skill damage. And then to double down, more skill damage, and then a chance for more skill damage. He does have some movement speed. Yes. He has a little bit of sustain. Yes. He's got some stats. Sure. But when you look at Guan as a champion compared with other champions of his era, what you're going to find is he actually doesn't have any more stats than any of the other commanders. He doesn't have any slows. He doesn't have any anti-swarm. He's got a little bit of sustain, but not like the other previous champions. And he doesn't set up any type of combos. And he doesn't really have that sense of flexibility anymore. So now you've really kind of moved with Guan away from those original concepts and to a much more open field, big AoE damage type champion who's also got those silences on his active, which is great. But really, we've moved away from all of the original concepts of the infantry commanders. Well, let's look at the next one of Harold. So Harold again is a big skill damage champion. He does set up combos, so we've gotten that back a little bit. But when you combine the fact that he's probably going to proc his active twice as often as everyone else, you're looking at somewhere between 2,400 and 3,000 skill damage. That's a lot of skill damage. And I'll tell you, if you surround this champion, it's going to get nasty. Just downright nasty. Don't do it. Because not only does he have this ability where if he's surrounded, he does an AoE, but he also has this ability where he does 20% more counterattack, scales all the way up to 40%, depending on how many targets are around him and how well he's surrounded. So, if we kind of recap on kind of the evolution here, first we started with lots of stats, lots of slows, lots of anti-swarm, sustained combos, flexibility. And by the end, we don't really have the stats we expect anymore. Now, Harold does stack these stats. He can get a lot of stats, okay, but he just doesn't have it from like the outright, like you'd expect from the original infantry commanders. So we've moved away from kind of stat checking people. We've moved away from the slows. We still have some of the anti-swarm. We've moved away from a lot of the sustain in the later champions, although that hangs in there for quite a while, like the first year that you'll play this game. And we still have some of the combos, which opens up a lot of the flexibility, right? But the other concepts where you're kind of that low priority on the battlefield and you can kind of hide those secondary commanders, telling you you're not hiding anything behind a Herald or Guan. Herald and Guan are big targets in the open field. Everyone knows they're huge damage threats, so you can't really do that the same as what you could with a Charles or a Richard. But On the flip side, one interesting evolution, though, since the start of this and the concept of flexibility with the infantry, for this we need to take a look at the other commanders real fast. And specifically, let's look at Khan first. So, what does Khan do? Khan does some really cool stuff, and we'll look at him when we get to him. I want to point this out. Khan requires all cavalry. Okay. And let's go look at some of the other commanders, and you'll see that this becomes a theme later in the game. Edward requires all infantry for some of his skills. Attila requires all cavalry. And you'll notice that kind of goes on. Ramses requires all archers. But when you go and look at the infantry commanders of the same era, Constantine doesn't require all infantry. Alex doesn't require all infantry. Guan, Harold, Zenobia, none of those champions require all infantry. The only one that does is Leo. So why am I mentioning this? Because later on in the game, you might not have the flexibility, and they may be moving these champions in a way to kind of take away that flexibility that you'd seen with the Charles and the Richard. But on the flip side, they don't bottleneck you in to saying you can only have one troop type. They allow for mixed troops. And why is this important? Because when you look at these leadership style of commanders like Ethel, she requires 3 different types of troops. And then you get these nice big bonuses. And to kind of double down on that, you can see that you also kind of get this march speed reduction from Ethel. Well, let's go look at another champion, and that's going to be YSS. So YSS again requires mixed troops to get the benefit out of this 40% stats. That's a lot of stats. And let's come look at his active. You'll see he has march speed reduction. So while we have moved away from some of these original concepts that they had with the infantry, they've opened those back up by allowing more flexibility. And then you can use some of these leadership commanders to kind of fill in that void. Now, you can do this theoretically with the other troop types, but remember, you're not going to get the full benefit of these effects because if you have all cav, you can't have 2 troop types. If you have all archers, you can't have 2 troop types, right? That's just common sense. But to summarize this a little bit, let's start at the beginning and do a quick recap. So infantry, what are they good at in this game? Well, as time goes on, we see that the stat checking doesn't really hold up, but they are really sticky when you combine that with the flexibility. They have really good anti-swarm. They have really good sustain. They set up combos remarkably well. They're very flexible in their commander pairings, which are all great things for the infantry. So it's that quintessential frontline, very versatile style of fighter. You can be very offensive, you can be very defensive, you can provide buffs, you can provide that big AoE, you can provide that single target. Infantry really do have a lot of options, and these options stem from the fact that they're very simplistic. There's very few limitations, but on the flip side, there isn't much depth behind the infantry, which allows that flexibility and allows some of those pairings to really be effective. Now, if that's a style of fighting that you really enjoy, is the flexibility of kind of those moving, interchangeable parts, infantry are really good. If you like the ability to do a lot of different things in the open field, infantry are going to be really good for you. If you like that style of just going blow to blow with your opponent, last man standing wins, then infantry are going to be really good for you. Now, on the flip side of that, if you like commanders with a little bit more depth, with a little bit more intricacies, some kind of hidden mechanics in those combinations when you make them, then infantry are probably not going to be the best pick for you. If you kind of like that hit and run, very mobile style, probably don't go infantry. If you like kind of see those big red numbers popping up on the screen, if you like that massive burst, infantry is probably not going to be the choice for you. So I hope I did a pretty good job of breaking this down. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it got a little long, a little down in the weeds. Thanks for hanging in there with me. If you like this video, please share it with your alliance mates. If you're looking forward to the next video in the series, hit the subscribe button, and then you'll get notifications when those come out. I did want to say real quick, thank you to the community. You guys have been fantastic. The feedback has been phenomenal. It has really motivated me to keep me going and keep making these videos. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Your support has meant a tremendous amount to me. Um, and I just wanted to say that the community is it really is an awesome community, and it's a community that we built, and it's a community that we need to keep together. So thank you guys again, and you guys have a good night.